Hello, I'm Daniela Mellen. In today's video, I'm going to show 5 fun techniques for sewing a 2-hole button onto your slow stitching pieces. Now, the button sewing is completely aesthetic. It is not functional. You can't button a jacket or a coat or a dress with it, but it is very beautiful and it adds a different element to your pieces. This way, you're not just stitching a button onto your work, but you're adding a little artistic flair as well. Now, I use identical buttons for all my techniques just so you can see the variation. They're just black 1.5-inch buttons, and I use pretty thread, different colors that will show contrast. Now, that's what I do with my slow stitching as well, is incorporate the thread into the work. I'd either coordinate it or use it for contrast. I hope this idea inspires you. So I have all my buttons here. They're about 1.5 inches wide, just with those 2 holes. Now, a couple of things to consider. If you're sewing on a functional button, you want to sew it differently because you need it to be durable and you need there to be space and give. Sewing it decoratively, you just want to make sure it's tacked down securely, and then you also want to have the aesthetic element. So with any of these techniques, be sure to keep in mind that you can flip your button over. You don't have to use it like a functional button. So if you want that smooth edge on this particular button, you can use it this way. Or if I wanted that rounded concave edge, I could do it like this. Some buttons are embossed and they're all different, but just for today's demonstration, I'm just using a simple 2-hole button. So we all know the simple 2-hole button where you just sew in between those 2 holes to hold it down, so I won't bother with that one. But I have a button template here, and I just wanted to show you, before I actually make the stitch, the technique I'm going to use here, the decorative techniques. So to start with, I'm going to create a stitch where I go on either side of the button. And so those stitches, there's nothing connecting the 2 stitches. You can always throw one in if you want, but for today's purpose and this decorative element for their first one, I'm just going to make these 2 kind of adjoining angles. So I'm taking my button and just holding it in place. And again, I can turn it however I want. I happen to want those holes side by side. I'm going to take my pink thread. I've already knotted all my colors here. And again, I'm choosing this color because you can see it in the camera, but also because the contrast looks nice. If I was using it for a specific piece, I'd probably be careful to try and either match the piece or coordinate it somehow. So I'm going to pull up my needle from underneath my fabric here until the knot catches, and then I can just put my button in. Now, this is a large enough button that it's fun to work with, and it has a little give. So I have my initial button in place, and now I'm going to go across diagonally, and I can choose how much of an angle I want. I can either go all the way down or just somewhat of an angle, this way or this way. So I'll just go down, and whatever angle I choose, I'm going to try and match it again. And this time I'm going to come up on the outer portion of the button, very close to the button, and I'll come down and bring it down through that same buttonhole. So I've got a fun little kind of a open triangle there. I'll go on the other side, come up from the center buttonhole, and now I'm going to try and match that angle. So I know I just want to go directly across. So I'm just going to put my fabric, I'm going to put my needle through my fabric over there. And again, I'll just come around over here, and I want to match it approximately the same height. So I'll come up from the bottom here. And again, I want to go fairly close to that button. And I have that button stitched down in a very unorthodox, very unusual formation. And I really like that. I'll knot it on the back, just bringing my needle through my loop. And this is how I'll do all my knots. I'll just show you on this one. And once it's secure, I'll snip it. And then we'll start on our next button. So that's our first button, 1 of 5. So now for our second button, again, we're not going to go in between the 2 holes. We're just going to go up and down and up and down. So that gives another interesting way to stitch that button. So now I'm going to take my button, and I'll take my yellow thread this time. Again, I'm going to come up from the fabric approximately in line with those first buttons. I'll stitch up from the hole on the right, and I'll stitch straight up, and I pull down. And then I'm going to just come up over here, just to the left of the button, right in line with that hole, and go down. And then I can come up from the hole and continue straight down, and then match it on the bottom here. Now, until I knot my thread, threads may be loose, so I just got to keep them taut and stitch it down. And there I have my second button. I'll knot it off, and then we'll begin our third button. Now, so far we've made our buttons symmetrical. Whatever's on one side is on the other. For our third one, we're going to veer off a little bit differently, and we're going to create kind of a plus mark on the one side of the button. I'm going to do the left side, and then on this side we're just going to come out here. You can again optionally connect the two holes in the button, but I kind of think that's interesting to have that space, so I'll choose to leave it. I'm going to take my green thread and another button here. And again, I'm just going to keep my buttons with the holes going across, just because it's easy that way. Put my first needle in, thread my button, then I'll hold it in place and I'll stitch directly across using that portion of the button first. And then I'm going to come back and stitch in that second hole, and then I'll stitch directly straight down. So I'll come up again, and this time on the left hand side at approximately 9 o'clock, very close to the button. This makes it easier than have to try and find the hole. And I stitch across, and then I'll come up straight up top here. And I just want to go fairly straight, and I'll stitch right down. And so then I have that lopsided stitched button, and I think it's very interesting. I'll knot it on the back, and then we'll start our fourth button. For our fourth button, we're going to cover more of the button. We're going to take our threads and go up on the top, on the bottom, and just on the sides. So we're dividing it into 4 quadrants, really, with this channel in between. So I'm using blue thread this time, planning to put my button right here, stitch my needle through, I have my button in position. I'm going to go right to the right to 3 o'clock, make my first stitch. Then I'm going to come up from about 5:30, the position on a clock, and go straight up into that buttonhole. Then I'll go right to the top, bring it straight down right into that buttonhole. This is starting to really secure the button. I'm going to try and come up in that center hole, that left-hand hole. Come down. Again, I want to come straight down. Then I'm going to come up from the center hole again, go across here to 9 o'clock, and I'm going to try my luck at coming up through that center hole one more time and going straight up top. And so there I have my fourth button. Now, not only do the colors look intriguing, but I like the way that that covers more of the button. I could play around here, just making it a little more symmetrical, but I like the way that looks. I'll knot it, and then we'll start our final button. So now for our final button, we're going to take our button and we're going to stitch across and then the mirror image. So it's not symmetrical, but it is balanced. So I'm going to take my purple thread here, my last thread, plan where that button's going to go, and then just stitch that first stitch, pulling my needle through the fabric, attaching that button, and then I'm going to go right to my 3 o'clock. That seems to be my go-to spot for my first stitch. I'm going to come back in on that hole. That may take me a few tries, and go straight up. Then I'm going to jump over to that second hole, trying my hand at coming up through that hole and going straight down. And if I don't have the right angle, I can just release the needle and pull out the thread, rethread that needle, and make that angle that I want. So I'll just hold that thread taut, and I just want to move it slightly from where I stitched the first time. Then I'll come up from that center hole again, then I'll go across to the 9 o'clock. I'll knot the back of my fabric, and then we'll take a look at our finished work. So there are 5 different button stitching techniques. They're all decorative. They give a different effect that you might find useful in your work. Now, there are lots more variations, but these are the first 5 that I'm going to show. I'll do future videos with more versions, as well as versions using a 4-hole button and even a shank button. So that's 5 techniques for sewing a 2-hole button onto your slow stitching pieces. I'll do more techniques in the future, and we'll start working on 4-hole buttons as well as shank buttons. Thanks for joining me today. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe.